US President Donald Trump threatens Nigeria with military action, claiming that Christians are being persecuted. The government and Christian groups in Nigeria deny this, saying that armed groups have killed people of all faiths. So what's behind Trump's claims, and what is the security situation? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finighan. Bemusement, but also worry in Nigeria over US President Donald Trump's sudden warning of possible military action against the country, claiming that Christians are being persecuted. The allegation has been denied by the government, which says that people of all religions, and not just Christians, are victims of armed groups in the country. But for months, claims of Christians being targeted have been made by senior US political, media, and Christian evangelical figures, led by Trump ally Senator Ted Cruz. Trump's threat of military action came days before President Bola Tinubu's visit to the US. The Nigerian leader's election platform 2 years ago included strong pledges to improve security, but the danger from armed groups such as Boko Haram remains, despite stronger government action and more military resources. So what's behind Trump's threats, and why now? And what is the security situation in the country? We'll hear from our guests shortly, but first, a report from Alexandra Byers.
A weekend social media post from the US president threatening to attack Africa's largest country. Writing on Truth Social, Donald Trump warning that unless the Nigerian government stops what he called the killing of Christians by terrorists, the US may go in, quote, guns a-blazing. He says he's instructed the Department of War to prepare for possible action. The post came after he redesignated Nigeria as a country of particular concern. And the next day, he doubled down, saying the U.S. could deploy troops or carry out airstrikes.
They're killing record numbers of Christians in Nigeria. And they have other countries very bad also. You know that part of the world, very bad. They're killing the Christians and killing them in very large numbers. We're not going to allow that to happen.
His comments are making headlines in Nigeria. President Bola Tinubu and other officials say Trump's claims aren't accurate. Speaking to Al Jazeera on Sunday, Nigeria's Foreign Affairs Ministry denied the country is allowing Christians to be killed.
We are ready to work with partners to help us to fight the scourge of terrorism in the country, but not any passive action that will undermine the sovereignty of our country.
Nearly 240 million people live in Nigeria. The country is divided between a Muslim majority in the north and a largely Christian population in the south. For more than a decade, Boko Haram and other extremist groups have waged an insurgency in the northeast, forcing millions of people from their homes and leaving communities in crisis. In the center, violence frequently breaks out between mostly Muslim herders and farming groups, who are often Christian, over access to water and pasture. Federal forces are said to be overstretched, but Nigeria insists its security challenges affect citizens across all faiths. The moves by Trump come as President Tinubu is due to visit the U.S. on Tuesday for talks with Vice President J.D. Vance. Tinubu and many Nigerians say they'd actually welcome U.S. help stopping the bloodshed, but only if it respects Nigeria's status as a democratic and sovereign nation. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
So let's bring in our guests. From Abuja, we're joined by Malik, senior researcher at Good Governance Africa. Yinka Adegoge is the Africa editor at the news website Semaphore. And from London, we're joined by James Barnett, a research fellow at the Hudson Institute, where he focuses on armed groups in Nigeria and in the Horn of Africa. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you all. Malik, let's start with you. What are we to make of Trump's threat to use US military force on Nigerian soil? And let's put something to bed straight away. Is there a campaign of Christian genocide in Nigeria, as some conservative lawmakers in the US have claimed?
Thank you for having me. Absolutely not. There is nothing like a Christian genocide going on in Nigeria. And it is quite surprising that the US president, the president of the most powerful country in the world, would rely on false narrative to actually threaten Nigeria. So there is nothing like a Christian genocide happening anywhere in Nigeria.
Yinka, do you agree with that? To what extent do Trump's threats risk making the situation in Nigeria worse? Why now? Was the intention to placate right-wing Christians at home in the US whose views are false and simplistic, as Malik was saying? Was he seriously threatening to send US troops into Nigeria just before the president of Nigeria is due to visit Washington?
Yeah, this is the thing with Trump. You just never know. I just seen your clip there. You could hear his phrasing. He has a very particular phrasing he uses, which he used with South Africa. You know, they're killing the Christians. You know, you remember when he said they're killing the whites or something. So it just feels like it's the last thing that he heard, or the last thing that has been said to him. But we must be clear: Christians are getting killed, but so are Muslims, because of Nigeria's own terrible insecurity problem, which has, gone on for a decade and a half now. Started with Boko Haram, but then has kind of evolved into lots of other kind of insecurity problems. So it's not that there isn't bloodshed happening, but it's not, as your previous guest said, some sort of concerted targeting of Christians in particular. It's insecure for many, many millions of Nigerians. And the idea that this is specifically focused on any one group is misleading. And as you kind of pointed out yourself there, kind of ties in with a kind of a focus on a narrative style, encouraged by Christian conservatives in the United States, because this is very much a kind of focus for them. That Christians have been targeted all over the world, particularly in countries where there are lots of Muslims. So, and Nigeria has about 50% of the population is Muslim. So it ties in with a narrative which isn't really Nigeria's. Nigeria has lots of its own problems. We have plenty of our own problems, and we don't need the sort of American narratives sort of imposed upon them as well.
We'll talk more about the root causes of as you describe it, Yinka, Nigeria's insecurity problem as the discussion moves forward. But James, to what extent do President Trump's claims obscure the bigger picture here? To what extent do they risk inflaming the situation?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I do think that's one way to put it, right? That this is kind of missing the bigger picture, which is not so much about religious persecution per se, as it is more about kind of rampant insecurity across the country that affects Muslims and Christians alike, as well as, I would add, impunity for kind of armed actors that engage in violence, as well as in some cases, political figures who stoke violence in different ways. To say that the kind of fundamental, drivers of conflict in Nigeria are not limited to religion is not to say that religion is not a very important part of Nigerian identity, Nigerian political discourse, and all of that. And I think that's really where a lot of the apprehension on the part of the Nigerian government, as well as many Nigerians, comes from, because there is this fear that this, Nigeria does have a long history of periodic kind of, clashes or violence or riots over religious issues, as well as more generally during election season and stuff. Religion is a very important part of the political discourse, and it can be a very divisive one. And so when the president of the United States weighs in and essentially is kind of prioritizing or putting more weight on the suffering of one community as opposed to another, and as Malik said, very well, right, and Yinka, that Muslims and Christians alike are both suffering tremendously as a result of this insecurity, it does have that risk, I think, of at the very least complicating and undermining any kind of political consensus in Nigeria that could potentially form to address these issues. And in the worst case, it can serve to actually kind of exploit or exacerbate these divisions further. And I think we're already seeing that. Ironically enough, some of the kind of most hard-lined Islamist clerics of the sorts that, President Trump would be very opposed to, are using his announcement really as kind of ammunition to say, look, see, the United States is trying to stoke a religious war. The United States is trying to invade Nigeria, all of this stuff. So I think that one of the kind of key pieces of advice I would give to the United States government, if for whatever it's worth, is that you need to understand why not only would people potentially take offense at this narrative, but also why it could potentially actually be very a politically challenging one, especially if your goal is to try to increase counterterrorism cooperation and frankly to kind of increase the political consensus within Nigeria that's necessary to tackle some of these security problems.
Okay, Malik, we've established then that these armed groups operating in Nigeria are not discriminating between Christians and Muslims. Is religion involved in their campaign at all here? What is driving the violence in the northeast of the country? What is motivating the armed groups operating there?
The two factions of Boko Haram, the Jamaat al-Islam al Jihad, and the Islamic State West Africa province, that dominate the security or insecurity landscape in the northeast. First, their campaign, yes, they seek to establish what they call a Sharia state, which means they are religiously driven by ideology. Now, this means they would naturally target who they see as non-Muslims. And there have been attacks against Christian communities, specifically because they are Christians. And the Islamic State West Africa province, ISWAP, has been very, very clear in publicizing such attacks in southern Borno, but also in northern Adamawa State, where Christian communities are a lot. So these attacks show that people are targeted because of their faith. When you look at the insecurity generally, you don't say there's a Christian genocide because Christians are being killed. Equally, these groups are also killing people of other faith, especially the Muslim faith. Now, talking about the drivers of the insecurity, especially in the northeast, a lot of, not just limited to the northeast, across northern Nigeria, a lot of these issues are boiled down to governance issues. And many of these places where these attacks happen are remote communities where that you go there, you struggle to understand if governance even exists. You go to communities where they don't have access road, they don't have potable water, they don't have access to healthcare, they don't have access to market. And so it is easy for this violent extremist group to come in, present themselves as the best alternative government by providing services. They provide services like giving economic empowerment, like cash for business, conflict resolutions, and all that. So when there's a vacuum that the state has willingly left, these groups will definitely come in and take advantage of. And in doing so, they are able to also recruit. So this contributes to their resilience, not only recruiting, but also raising the resources that they need to further their attack. Many times, this violence, especially these groups, are more dominant around the border communities. So this also speaks to the issue of our border porosity. It is easy, very, very easy for this armed group to move into Nigeria from outside. I just returned from the field, from the northwest, and I was shocked to find out that the recent or the so-called recent terrorist group called Lakrawa are actually holding territories, actually running communities.
Okay.
In the States is absolutely absent in these places. So these are some of the drivers of this insecurity, largely governance issues, the abdication of the government's responsibility to protect lives and property.
Okay, Malik. Yinka, do you agree with that basically at the root of all of Nigeria's problems with these armed groups lies poor governance? And is it exclusively a Nigerian problem? And how much of this is spilling in across the border from other regions, from other countries there?
No, it is definitely the picture Malik laid out there is definitely a challenge you find, particularly in the remote areas of the north of Nigeria, Governance is a huge issue across the Sahel region, right? And the Sahel region comes down into to Nigeria as well. So you see that as the governments are unable to provide services, unable to people have very little economic empowerment. Then you have the added challenge now of climate change affecting their land, and there's less water, so they can't farm like they used to traditionally for hundreds of years, and people move, and this all of these challenges have just enabled it to be easier for terrorists in the name of religion, but not just religion, but in the name of religion to be able to activate and be able to take advantage and be able to spread their their danger across the region. So you see that definitely in Nigeria, and you're seeing that in bordering countries, as we all know in the Sahel with Niger and all the way out to Mali and Burkina Faso and beyond, right? Because people have no options, and they have to work with these groups who provide them sometimes some option, but also threaten lives.
James, what do you make of the Nigerian government's response? I mean, how embarrassing is it for the country to have been so publicly threatened by the President of the United States? I mean, am I right in thinking that Nigeria currently has no ambassador in Washington? Trump has been generally supportive of the Nigerian government's counterterrorism efforts to date. Why the abrupt change in tone, especially given that he's keen to scale back US military involvement in conflicts elsewhere? I mean, especially in Africa after Somalia, and that he says he wants to avoid starting new wars.
Yeah, well, I think these are the pertinent questions, and I won't really speculate as to the president's kind of thinking itself. That's not really in my ballpark. I think that from the Nigerian government's point of view, they are surprised in part because of both the kind of the scale or the scope of the rebuke in terms of actually threatening military action, but also because, as you said, Trump has traditionally actually been pretty supportive of the counterterrorism efforts of the Nigerian military, both during his first administration, but even as recently as this past August, he approved weapon sales to Nigeria, despite the concerns of some in Congress, including some Republicans, about the Nigerian military's human rights records and such. So I think that on the one hand, they would say, well, we're very surprised by this, and their response so far has been quite restrained in trying to call for essentially a dialogue and stuff, and to understand what the president's position is. But as you noted, right, they've not had an ambassador in Washington for 2 years now, and I think that is in of itself a major shortcoming. I think that they shouldn't have been too surprised by kind of the general rebuke from Trump. The fact that Nigeria, could have been potentially or was going to be listed again as a country of particular concern should not have come as a surprise during the first Trump administration. President Trump designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern over these, perceived religious liberty or religious freedom violations. So a lot of this, in some ways, I would say, the general context has been there, and it's been very clear that there would probably be some sort of issue or some sort of disagreement, at least at some point. I think that we're all a bit surprised by the exact form and tone that it's taken. But I do think that the warning signs were there, if you will. In terms of what I think is the president really threatening military action. Again, I can only speculate, but I think what we've seen in his general kind of dealing, with regards to other international crises and other aspects of international relations, has been that he likes to kind of say these big bold things, and a lot of it sometimes is bluster, and part of that is a way to kind of gain leverage over the side that you're trying to negotiate with. So I think that one way to view this is not that the U.S. is all of a sudden going to be doing responsibility to protect interventions in Africa again, although some are calling for that. I think it's more that this is kind of the opening salvo, if you will, in some sort of kind of set of negotiations with the Nigerian government. The problem is that it's not very clear, at least to me as an outside observer, what exactly the Trump administration hopes Nigeria will kind of, what they can do in the near term, right? If the idea is that, well, by threatening military action, the Nigerian government needs to solve the problem of the killing of civilians, immediately or else. Well, that's going to be very difficult because, as Malik and Yinka, kind of rightfully said, these conflicts they're the result of decades of neglect, poor governance, various factors. Successive governments, since the 2000s have failed to keep a lid on them. So the Nigerian government is not going to be able to resolve these conflicts overnight. I would hope that this is kind of serving as a wake-up call, that they can implement some reforms. There's much more that could be done in various ways, both the so-called kinetic and the non-kinetic approaches. But that stuff doesn't happen overnight. So I think it's still very much an open question of, is there a specific list of kind of, demands, if you will, that the Trump administration is going to make of Nigeria?
James, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just very briefly. Yeah, Yinka wants to come in, but James, I'll let you in a moment, Yinka. But first, James, just very briefly, to sound a note of skepticism. You talked about the Trump administration wanted to gain some sort of leverage over the Nigerian government. Trump's the businessman, of course. Is he eyeing Nigeria's natural resources? It's oil.
I really don't know about that. Again, I can only speculate, but what I would actually say is, generally speaking, actually, the international oil companies have been divesting from their onshore investments in Nigeria due to insecurity and oil theft. I think that the administration's general approach to Africa has been about business deals. And I think that the Nigerian government itself, especially given the role of Masad Boulos as the special or senior envoy for Africa, there is a view that, yes, maybe with the Trump administration, there can be opportunities for more commercial engagement and stuff. So I think that's all, I think that angle is definitely there. But there are also other kind of outstanding issues in bilateral relations, right? The Trump administration has also been asking Nigeria to accept deportees from the United States, and the Nigerian government has refused that so far. So that's been a sticking point. There's, of course, the general issue around tariffs and the trade wars that are happening. But again, I can't specifically say that these are the issues that are on the docket for negotiation. At this point, I think all any of us can do as outsiders is kind of speculate and point to some of the outstanding issues in bilateral relations. But again, what exactly the Trump administration is hoping to achieve through this, to me at least, I think is very much an open question.
Okay, Yinka, what was it you wanted to come in on?
The quick point I wanted to add on to what James was saying there is that, he made a great point, right? This is a very transactional Trump White House, right? And the thing where Nigeria really had a big failing here was in basic diplomacy. And they really should have been back channeling with the White House and the State Department for months. Then, the point about not having an ambassador is a very glaring one, but you could have a special envoy. You could, whatever you call this person, you should be working lobbyist. I mean, one of the parts of this story that's really fascinating about how we got to this point with Trump hearing about Christians being killed is that there'd been a lot of lobbying from separatist groups in Nigeria who've been lobbying about, all sorts of issues, but particularly around these killings, right? Because they understood that if they could just get Trump's ear on this, they would get somewhere. And the Nigerian government is nowhere to be seen in Washington, D.C. I spent a lot of time there. I do a lot of work speaking to various people there. And the Nigerian government is nowhere to be seen on this most important issue, particularly with this White House, more so than anyone in the past. So there have been failings there, which then sort of have this domino effect of getting us to this point.
Malik, how do Nigerians feel about their government's failure to get a grip on the situation, which appears to be so difficult to resolve? How do they feel about the country's politicians? How do they feel about the corruption? We saw those really alarming headlines in Alexandra's reports on the front pages of the newspapers. What are people saying about all of this?
I think, irrespective of the political parties that Nigerians belong to, one issue that Nigerians have been overwhelmingly united on is the issue of insecurity. And every Nigerian feels disappointed that the government is unable, or the government is willingly unable to deal with the problems, right? And it is the result of the government's negligence that we are seeing, that people who feel the government is not protecting them enough are seeking from outside the country. right? And so many Nigerians, the only issue they have with what President Trump has said is the framing as a religious persecution. But other than that, they welcome the U.S. support, the U.S. help in dealing with insecurity in Nigeria. I'll give you an instance. In one of the communities that I had interviewed in the Northwest, in Sokoto State, for instance, I put the questions to the people and I asked them because the access to their place, it's so difficult to reach there. And I asked, do politicians not come there because they have representatives? And what they told me shocked me. They said during campaigns, politicians don't come there. Rather, politicians transport them to the local government headquarters that is safe. After the campaigns, they are transported back to their villages. But during voting, elections take place in these places. So you begin to understand the mindset of our politicians. They are interested more in grabbing power, but when it comes to fulfilling their responsibility, the issues they campaign on, they are nowhere to be found. And this is why Nigerians are complaining, and you cannot blame them because the first responsibility of the government is the protection of lives and property. So if the government is not doing enough, or the people see that the government is not doing enough, you cannot blame them for seeking help outside. The problem, it's just the approach, what the U.S. president, the approach that the U.S. president has taken. And for me, I have an issue with that because the U.S. has one of the biggest embassies or consulates in the region in Nigeria. The U.S. president has access to credible information.
Okay.
So what is happening? Where is it getting his information from? So that's just the problem. But Nigerians are overwhelmingly united in condemning the government's inability,
Malik,
to protect and secure their
Malik,
lives.
I'm sorry, Malik, to interrupt you. We are rapidly running out of time. Yinka, I've got about a minute left. Nigeria said that it would welcome assistance from the US in fighting armed groups as long as its territorial integrity is respected. Fair enough. I mean, rather than issuing threats against Nigeria, shouldn't Trump have been offering military assistance, but also assistance with good governance to work with the Nigerian government in solving this problem once and for all?
I think, as the point has been made by both your guests, my fellow guests, you get the sense that the focus here is a negotiation, a kind of a transaction, right? So, sure, that was what most presidents and most U.S. presidents would do. They would offer, assistance. They would offer military assistance rather than saying we're going to go in guns a-blazing, which just doesn't sound practical or realistic. And just gets everybody, very defensive and gets people's backs up. But it might be a kind of negotiation around, as was said, we need you to take some of these deportees. We need you to, agree to some sort of tariff deal or some other kind of deals. Something that has nothing to do with the issue at hand. It's just that, and also, with these visits of President Tinubu to Washington, they will probably put some things to him there, which he may or may not agree to. They may put him in a very difficult.
All right, we're going to have to wait and see. There we must end it. Many thanks indeed, Malik, Samuel, Yinka, Adegoke, I'm sorry. Hang on, let me do that again because I can't say your name wrong incorrectly. Right, here we go. And we are just going to have to wait and see. There, I'm afraid we must end it. Malik, Samuel, Yinka, Adegoke, and James Barnett. Many thanks indeed for being with us on Inside Story today. Thanks for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page. That's at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can always join the conversation on X. Our handle there is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. We'll see you again. Bye for now.